Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside David Corbin. Glad to have you with us to explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020
All right, Dave.
vision.
Well, we're getting ready for our annual trip to New England, New York. Exciting. Other than the 4 a.m. wake-up call to
Right.
catch the plane in Colorado Springs. As you know, traveling in the summer is always fun as well, right?
Yeah.
2-hour delays, 3-hour delays, whatever it may be. So we put a lot of time into kind of, okay, well, we'll sit for 2 hours to make sure that we catch the flight. But we're looking forward to it. We'll go up to Lake Winnipesaukee and visit my family, and Katie's parents get a place in Algonquin, and then we do our annual trip to Saratoga for the horse races. If you've never done that, anyone living in that area or going to New England and greater New York in the summer, it's a must. Gambling in general tends to be seedy, and you're like, oh man, and you're around people and you feel sorry for them and you feel sorry for yourself. There's something about Saratoga, however, that is just magical. It's almost like that Kentucky Derby, the Triple Crown type feel. In fact, they've held the Belmont there the last couple of years.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful city. There's a lot there. The New York City Ballet comes up for the summer, and I think also the New York City Orchestra comes there as well. So
Nice.
a lot of things to do. We're only going to be there for 2 days and a night, but we're looking to have fun. And it's the cheapest family event ever. You pay $5 per person. You can bring in your own food, your own beverages. And so for a family of four, $20 just to kind of get in, and the horses are just, I mean, the horse as a creation of God is just, it's this majestic creature when you see it up close. So
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
you can tell I'm excited. How much I lose? Well, we'll save that for Tocqueville's crystal ball.
Okay. Sounds like a great trip.
Yep.
Yeah, we're sweltering here a little bit. We've hit 90 the last couple of days. Although it's supposed to get very nice starting tomorrow for the next week and a half, according to the 10-day forecast. So that'll be great. But it's funny, we get these texts every day from our power company saying, hey, could you just cut back a little bit on power usage between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. because we're going through a heat wave. And I think, yeah, that's why we need power between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m.
Exactly.
It's hot.
Right.
I mean, why do we have a power company? Cold days, if you could just not put the heat on, that would be great. And hot days, no AC, if you don't mind. Well, what are we paying you for?
That's right.
I mean, it's 90 degrees. This is summer. This is going to happen. Every summer you're going to have a handful of days in the 90s. This is 110. It's not some month-long heat wave. We don't need a text from you telling us to watch our AC. We're doing fine with that. We're paying high enough prices here in New Jersey anyway for power that we're not going to use it unnecessarily. But it's a little bit ridiculous to have them telling us to watch our power usage when this is when we need it.
Tell you maybe solar panels on the Parks house or something like that.
I know. Yeah,
Figure
I've
it
looked
out.
into that, but it just always seems like it's a boondoggle. By the time you actually do the math, we get a lot of sun on the one side of the house. If any house was set up for it, ours is pretty well oriented for it. But I don't know. They want you to lease the panels, and who needs debt and all the rest. So I don't think we're going there. But yeah, on a day like today, it's definitely tempting to figure out a way to provide your own energy.
No Green New Deal for the Parks family. Okay.
Not yet. No.
Okay.
So today we're on to chapter 4, going back to our 2010 book, Keeping Our Republic, Principles for a Political Reformation. And we've made our way through 3 of the 6 principles we highlighted in that book. And today is maybe in some ways the most important of all, at least the essential virtue associated with politics, namely justice. And so, we've been talking about justice here and there as we've worked our way through other topics and other principles, but we want to hit this one head on right here. And that's going to lead us back to the Federalist. I guess that's perhaps inevitable, but to talk about ideas like faction and the importance of really distinguishing right political behavior, moral, honorable political behavior from that which is the opposite. And so I think there's a lot for us to say here. Dave, you want to give us a little maybe background for the newcomers for the principles we've talked about so far, then we can jump into justice.
Sure. So we've gone through three principles. The first principle we went through was equality. This is the idea that you can have a rule of justice to the degree that you recognize the dignity of all human beings. And if in a system where that equality is not recognized, then of course you won't get justice thereafter. Secondly, we covered responsibility, which is the idea that we have an obligation, right, to give a rationale for the choices that we make. We are moral agents, right? We don't live in a world in which things are done to us. I mean, that in part is the world that we live in. There is contingency, but we make choices. And this likewise, I think, builds into this principle we're going to talk about today, justice, because if you're not in control of your own actions and you don't have to have an obligation for the choices that you make, you could be unjust and say, well, no, listen, it's just the way I was made. Thirdly, we covered honor in our last show, and that is this idea that it is possible to cultivate both statesmen and citizens who think in terms of the common good rather than act kind of within a system where you just say, well, everything's kind of a mess, so I'm just going to take care of myself. Everything is a zero-sum game,
right,
et cetera. So you can't get to justice, I don't think, unless you have a clear understanding and practice of these first three principles of equality, responsibility, and honor. But as I think we'll see today in this discussion about justice, justice really is kind of that's the end game. That's the end goal. And there's a principle behind justice that, while not always practiced by humankind, can be. So what is that principle, Matt? What is the principle of justice?
Well, I think classically, we've always understood justice to be rendering to each his own. And if you think about that, a biblical kind of justice, you go back to the ancients, I think you're going to find some variation of that understanding really that permeates that. You come to the American founders, and they wouldn't disagree with that, but they would put some more meat on those bones, and they would particularly talk about protecting the natural rights of each individual person. And so if you work your way through the Federalist or other founding era documents, you will find this close connection between justice and the protection of individual rights. So that's kind of the framework that we're operating in as we think about this in terms of keeping the American Republic. We want to think about this, the way the founders did, the way their successors did that honored their project. And so primarily we're thinking about what it is to not just demand my own rights. That's easy. That's the normal move. We're all very good at sticking up for our own rights, but how do I train myself and train the majority, perhaps even more importantly, to respect the rights of all? One of the things we used to talk about in class at King's is the difference between majority rules and the majority ruling on behalf of the whole. Right? So where the majority rules for its own sake and just simply seeks to get enough people in that majority to conquer the rest or divide up the spoils of the rest, that's one approach, and that's the common approach to politics, unjust to its core. But on the other hand, the majority can rule on behalf of the whole and can think about policies that actually are advantageous to everybody, even if not everybody would agree with those policies. We don't have to assume we're going to have unanimous approval of this tax bill or this healthcare law or whatever, but the laws can be crafted in such a way that there's an aim and to some degree an achievement of something that's good for everybody in the community.
Yeah, so you mentioned King's in our classes there on American political thought and practice and kind of going through the history of the American regime. I think what we're going to see today and what we've seen in these previous episodes is there's something unique about the American way of thinking about this problem of justice and how we arrive at justice. What I mean by unique is not original per se, but there's a recognition there that there is something to be done within political communities that is aspirational, yet also realistic.
Yeah.
And one thing I would always do when I got into this conversation, it usually would be the first or second class of the semester, is I'd ask my student, just back away for a second. Think of this image of the planet Earth kind of rotating, and if you were to back away and you were to look at the planet Earth and kind of it rotating over time, what has changed politically over the course of the last 2,000, 2,500 years? And one thing that I would ask them to think about is, if you were to go back in time 2,500, 3,000 years, most of the human communities that were in place across the world kind of operated on this basis that what really counts, what really matters, is the community itself. To the degree that if you were an individual within that community, you weren't calling for your rights. Like, my rights have been taken away from me. No, you were a Spartan, or you were an Athenian,
Right.
or you were a member of a tribe, and the tribe was essential, not you as an individual. But what happens over time, over the course of Western history in particular, is the individual gains a status that they did not have 2,000, 2,500 years ago.
Yep.
And you're like, well, that's incredible. Thank you, Socrates, for introducing kind of the rights of the individual philosopher trying to pursue wisdom. Thank you for all of those individuals across Western history who have placed the I upon a pedestal. Well, there's an issue with that, right? You can have a society that is too directed towards the we, the us being essential.
Yeah.
But you can also, on the other end of the spectrum, have a society that's too directed towards the I. So I would introduce this, and I would call it the I-we problem. To what degree is a political community organized, right, to account for, to care for the individual, the I, and to what degree is it directed toward the common good? And can you have a system that takes into account this need for a balance, per se, between the individual good and the common good? So what do you make of that, Matt, given the principle of justice?
That's very helpful. And I think, you said the founders had some of a unique approach to this. I think you're exactly right. If you look at some of the key passages in the Federalist, Madison talks about pursuing justice and the common good. And so if you go back to how I was defining justice earlier, as the protection of individual rights, then you have the common good alongside that. They're not necessarily in competition with each other. They're not the same thing exactly, but they're mutually compatible goals. And the way you test yourself as you're thinking about policy is, okay, does this help us to pursue the common good in light of individual rights without violating individual rights? We know where things went in the 1800s with the rise of utilitarianism, where all of a sudden we had our own kind of modern democratic version of the elevation of the we, the majority collective. And so now the individual whose rights are sacrificed, if it's one individual or a small group or a disliked group, no big deal, because the greater good for the greater number becomes the principle, rather than thinking about the individual rights bearer who's being harmed by that policy. So the founders had this unique formula of keeping both sides of this together, I and we. We want to protect individual rights as we pursue the common good. So we don't end up with isolated individuals who are just doing what's good for them and sort of ignoring what's happening around them and not feeling bound to make any sacrifice for the community as a whole. But also, we don't demand unreasonable sacrifice, literally unreasonable, where someone's asked to give up those rights which are theirs inherently for the sake of some generally advantageous policy or program for the community.
Yeah, and this is always asked, okay, well, were they aspirational? Were they idealists, or were they realists? And that paradigm of idealism versus realism can be taken out of whack really quickly, because I think the proper orientation or mindset to these issues is not one of a pure idealism that says, okay, the perfect can be created, or this kind of realism that where nothing good can be done. You've probably heard me say over and over again, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Well, make its better its friend. Make the better its friend. And I think that's their approach. And I think it's easier for those of the Christian faith to wrap their arms around this orientation. It probably wouldn't have been the language that the founders used, but I think it's helpful. If you look at human nature and this I-we problem simply from the perspective of the fall, and we are fallen creatures, we are sinners, and we are kind of just drenched in that sin where nothing can be done beyond that just fall, then you're going to have an attitude toward politics, policies, and justice, right, that skews you in one direction.
Yeah.
But if, on the other hand, Matt, everything is redemption, everything is redeemable, and there is no sin, right? Then, and this is a world without the fall, it's just redemption. If we just put the right system into place, that likewise, I think, skews our understanding of human nature. So what do I think the founders' approach is? I think we'll see this as we talk about the issue of justice, that there is fall and there is redemption, right? That the entirety of creation, right, involves both of those things. So to approach, right, these human problems and approach human nature from that vantage point that, yes, there's a fall, but yes, there can be redemption. But what does redemption look like politically? It's going to be, it's going to have some parallels to what it looks like within the Christian faith. But what does redemption look like, given where we are as human beings? So I think approaching justice from that perspective, I think it helps kind of ground you or center you, yet also helps you point toward a better thing.
If you think about the trajectory of things in American political thought, what happens post-Darwin is the corruption left and right along these lines. Yep. So on the right, you've got someone like a William Graham Sumner, the social Darwinists, who all they see is the ugly, right? They see the survival of the fittest. They see the worst parts of human nature. They want to be realists. They want to have eyes wide open. They see all the bad things and cultures that are failing, civilizations that are failing, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got others who take the sort of liberation from Christian norms and imagine this expansive possibility future. Right? You've got your Woodrow Wilsons and you've got your progressives of that period who see this promise of progress. So they see Darwinism as not this account of a dog-eat-dog kind of world, but a world that's making improvements, constantly working toward better and better things and guaranteed to get better things because of the same principle. And so they both got it wrong. Just as you're saying, they've given up this fundamentally Christian tension between a fallen world side by side, not just with the grace, the special grace that Christians receive by God, and then the transformation that comes from that, but also the common grace. God causes the rain to fall on the just and on the unjust. And seed time and harvest, these things are part of the natural cycle of things. God's written the law of nature upon our hearts so that we're able to understand basic things about right and wrong. And so even in non-Christian communities, but maybe communities influenced by Christianity, we see a certain kind of restraint that comes from these cultural institutions and laws built around them. So that's something that the founders absorbed, understood, and built upon, and gave us a picture that was aspirational without being unrealistic, that was realistic without being pessimistic. And so they were able to balance these things in such a way that allows us, I think this is our whole orientation, honestly, toward American politics, isn't it? We've been doing this for, years, these podcasts and writing, and we're always thinking, there's still a chance. Yet we also see all the trouble and the corruption. And if you say, are we better off now than we were 15 years ago? Maybe not. But yet there's still these principles that are available. There's still a pathway forward. There's still possibilities. And I think that's kind of the spirit of the founders as well.
Yeah, definitely. And they would have had 2,000 years of history to look at and all the issues, all the challenges, all the problems. And yet when they start anew at the end of the 18th century, they think through this. They think through the issue. So I've mentioned two touchstones here in framing this principle of justice: the I-We problem, a hyper-idealism versus a hyper-realism versus maybe somewhere in between, in which you kind of have a balanced approach to looking at what can happen in human affairs. And the third thing I want to bring into play, third touchstone, is I think a helpful kind of framing of what politics is about, and that comes to us from Aristotle, who says that really politics and asking questions about justice really boils down to asking two questions. Number one, who rules? And number two, to what end? Mm-hmm. And then what he says is, like, in most human societies, you either have the one person, the few, or the many rule. So the one, the few, and the many. And then there are two options for the one, the few, and the many. They can rule with the end of the common good in mind, or they can rule with their individual advantage in mind. And what Aristotle and other political philosophers in his vein tried to suggest is that you really have to encourage who's ever ruling, right, to rule toward the common good. But in the modern world, and a lot of this is drawn from modern political philosophy, you begin to question whether or not you can rule toward the end of the common good. And you have philosophers like Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes and John Locke and others who argue that, well, really at the end of the day, right, it amounts to who rules, but you can't make a choice if you're ruling between the common good and the individual advantage, because everyone just does things for their own advantage.
Right.
So we have to think, is it a possibility that those who are ruling and those who are being ruled can rekindle this language of the common good? And I think part of the rekindling of that language is rekindling a proper understanding of equality, of responsibility, of honor, and of justice, and realizing that politics, while oftentimes dirty, can be an ennobling affair if it's done well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Now, if we take this back to the American context and think about the problem of justice as the founders confronted it, one of the ways that they framed the issue was through the problem of faction. If you go back to Federalist 9, Hamilton talks about the fact that as you study the ancient republics, even the modern, let's say Renaissance era republics in Italy, for example, you see this problem over and over again. And so the majority gets power. And what does the majority do? It punishes those out of power. And then that majority loses power, and the new majority comes in, and they do the same. And it's back and forth and back and forth. And you have these brief periods of peace, or maybe it's just exhaustion, breaks in the conflict. But you look at the story and you say, we really want that? Is that what we can aspire to as Americans, seeking a republic? If that's all it is, who wants it? And so they recognize there has to be some way of doing this better. We have to deal with the danger of majorities that act in ways that are self-interested, that seek their own good rather than the common good, to go back to that Aristotelian language. And so Federalist 10 is really Madison laying out his assessment of how you might make some progress against this problem of faction. So I want to have us discuss that, but let's make sure we understand what a faction is, first of all, because this isn't familiar language today, but it really should be. We should be calling lots of things factious, lots of groups factions. That should be a dirty word, and it should be something that you wear with shame if you're factious, or you should feel you're forced to justify that you're not a faction when you lay out your program, when you try to show, hey, this is what's actually good because this would be good for all. You should have the obligation, the responsibility, to use one of other terms, of showing the goodness of your program in order to avoid being labeled a faction. So here's what he says. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community.
I think the key here for Madison, the author of Federalist 10, is that we can't get around faction. Okay, so this is the realism that is coming to the fore in the thought of Madison. Madison tells us that faction is sown in the nature of man. So it's part of who we are. We have different ideas as human beings of what justice is, or what good is, or what rights are. We have different interests. We have different talents. We have different capacities. We're placed in different circumstances. We have different experiences. And so you can't get around human difference. It's part of that which makes a human being is that we are different from one another. Interestingly, however, in a Republican setting, Republican government brings these matters before the public. So you shine a light on what we are, and the hope for Madison is by drawing our attention to our nature that is factious, we can then understand, well, why are we acting in a factious manner, and how might we redirect that which is sown in our nature in a way that is beneficial for the common good.
Yeah, when you have a king, it only really matters what the king likes. And if you've got labor versus management kinds of issues, not so important with regard to politics. Maybe you have economic consequences, social consequences, but your politics is determined by the king. But in a republic, in a popular government, it's the majority that rules. And so if that majority is divided along various economic lines, and that's the primary type of interest that Madison has in mind, given historical experience, then you're going to see that those differences will show themselves in legislation or in party politics, et cetera. And so it's important, it's something that he works on very carefully in Federalist 10. It's important to call a spade and to be willing to recognize that there are what he calls improper and wicked projects. Certain acts of legislation duly passed, majority ruled, got all the votes, nothing procedurally improper. Nevertheless, because of the way it intervened in the private interests and rights of individuals, it's an improper or a wicked project. And so he's not afraid to name some of those things. Certain kinds of debt relief he was talking about, efforts to equalize property. A lot of it had to do with this kind of redistribution, which we see as central to many of the political programs of our day. All this he saw was improper or wicked because it was a way of gaining wealth at the expense of somebody else rather than by linking effort with reward.
Yeah, you just marvel at Madison's mind here. Because go back to this framework of the two questions Aristotle poses to us: who rules and to what end?
Right.
And what we tend to do as you move toward kind of a modern democratic political setting is you say, well, the many are now ruling. That solves the problem. Who rules? Well, the many rule. And then, but you don't get to justice simply by having the many rule, because as you point out, the many can seek out improper and wicked projects. You can have a majority vote for something that's bad. So you don't get around the problem of justice simply by removing a king with the people. And Matt, this is a very common misconception that a lot of us living in the world today have, which is majority rules. They made their decision. It's right because the majority made it. I mean, you see it like if you're on elevators in big buildings, you'll see the little television screen will say 83% of the American people believe X. Well, just because 83% of the American people believe it doesn't make that it's right. We can believe many things that are wrong, and there's nothing in having a majority inherently that makes the majority right. The majority can be misguided as much as a king can be misguided or a group of friends can be misguided, especially when you take into account this problem of faction. That there's something sown in our nature that's going to want to make us see things in a way that benefits us rather than other people.
Yeah. So Madison looks at this problem and says, okay, look, we're not going to be able to just not have faction. The ways you can accomplish that are simply off the table. You're going to give everyone the same opinions. How are you going to do that? Are you going to not allow people to have any role in politics? That's not a good answer.
But by the way, just sorry to interrupt, but that's what a lot of people have been trying to do the last 150 years. Make everyone alike.
Right.
Assume that everyone can be alike. Do not allow for difference of opinion. So he realizes, okay, that's you can go back to this notion of just imprint a we upon us and everyone has to have the same opinions, et cetera. But is that liberty? Is that living kind of within a just Republican government? No. So sorry to interrupt, but we try that, don't we? Try these things, don't we?
Yeah, no, that's right. No, you interrupt when you're on fire. You go. But no, that's just the problem. So if we can't prevent factions from coming into being, then we have to try to control the effects, he says. And the benefit of the United States is that we have two things going for us that might allow us to do that. Namely, with a larger country, we have a better choice among our elected officials. We ought to have more worthy people to choose from, assuming that we would choose well if we're able to choose well. And that with many factions, it'll be more difficult for them to get control of the national government, at least. Maybe the state governments, but not the national government. Now, that assumes, of course, they don't band together and form factious political parties, for example, right? Coalitions of various groups. And of course, that's one of the challenges that's arisen in the years since, that we do have arguably majority factions that are calling themselves parties, and that then band together people with some measure of overlapping interest in order to seize control of the government and use that power to implement their program at the expense of everybody else. So this is not a problem that simply being the United States solves, but Madison tries to point us in some directions that will be helpful. And one of those directions we've already talked about is the importance of calling faction faction and making sure we understand that there are actions that are wrong and policies that are wrong and proposals that are wrong, and those need to be combated and called out on those terms. So, I think it might be useful for us at this point to maybe bring up some examples here, right? So go back to the book in 2010. What were the issues we were talking about then, and what are some examples today that would be illustrations of this problem of faction?
Well, I mean, the big one, right, in 2010 was Obamacare, right? And the president and his administration trying to get Obamacare passed. So how do you go about doing that in Washington, D.C. in the year 2010? Well, that's where the power is. That's where the money is. Those are where the doors are opened in Washington, D.C. So you bring in the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are people who they may be harmed if your legislation passes, but you make sure that there's a cutout, right, for this group or for that group. And you negotiate in a way where you tend to the interests of the powerful who have a seat at the table to get your legislation through. We also saw this, right? We had this kind of notion of banks that were too big to fail.
Right.
Well, why were they too big to fail? They were too big to fail because the people who were there were, quote unquote, important and had a seat at the table, and they could be bailed out from their decisions. And we were told as an American public, well, this is good for you. We're going to help all these people, right, who have made bad decisions not face any consequences for the decisions that we made. And go back to these earlier principles, Matt, that we've covered. Where do you find equality in that set of negotiations? It's not there. Because if you're not at the table, right, you don't have the power to say, well, this is bad for me. Responsibility. Do you have agency for the choices you've made as a big bank or whatever it is? No, not if you're at the table, right? And then finally, honor. How much dishonor was part and parcel of these negotiations? So this is what was going on in 2010. I mean, it's not that it just happened in 2010. It happens all the time. And it's why every election season I was like, oh, Washington, D.C., we need to drain the swamp. This is swamp-like behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things we tried to do in the chapter, because those were in some ways easy targets, or maybe they were at least targets that were easy to put at arm's length from ourselves. So we weren't supporters of Obamacare. We weren't in favor of the Cornhusker kickback and all the rest of those negotiations. We weren't in favor of all the bailouts associated with the financial crisis. And so you can say, well, kind of smug and self-satisfied. Yeah, we're on the side of the angels here. We're trying to fight the good fight, but it's all those other people that are doing this. Well, there's also other parts of this, right? So there's a lot of individual tax measures. There's a lot of little carve-outs in regulatory laws and procedures that benefit groups like ourselves, perhaps in some ways. And maybe we didn't put them in there. We weren't the ones that were negotiating for that special provision, but nevertheless, we benefit from it. May not be that much against it, right? May be glad to have that extra little deduction on our taxes come April 15th. And so just to have that mindset and to say, okay, it's not just about these big corporate entities, the big K Street lobbyists, but it's really about the kinds of things that we benefit from as well, and the ways that we use our general political power to benefit people that look like ourselves.
Yeah, I agree, because once again, faction is sown in the nature of man, not the nature of others, but also Matt Parks and Dave Corbin. I can't think of an issue right now. If I could have any legislation passed as a person who incubates schools, it would be a $10,000 tax credit for every parent to choose the school of their choice. And I could make an argument that this would be great for the American educational system, great for parents, et cetera. At the end of the day, is there something that's going to benefit David Corbin by suggesting that legislation? And the answer is yes. So it doesn't mean that we couldn't pursue that, but you'd have to pursue it in a way, going back to something you said earlier, in which you can make the argument that the common good is going to be benefited by this legislation, and not simply kind of thinking it in terms of, well, through my lens, this would be good for my bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about some more maybe 2025 applications here. The big news of the last week or so was the trade deal between President Trump on the one hand and the EU on the other, and working out some of the details there at 15% tariff. That's kind of the headline. But then you get into it a little bit further and you find out, well, actually, there's a carve out here, and this is exempted, and this is exempted. And hopefully there'll be more exemptions, actually, on the EU side anyway. They're hoping to add to the list of things that have no tariffs. And President Trump comes back and say, well, they're still not really doing much for American automakers, and so we've still got some work to do there. And so you start to see this kind of industry by industry analysis of this, and you find out, oh, yeah, there's a lot of inside baseball that's going on here, and maybe it's, you take the deal you can take, right? I mean, you have to have two parties to agree to a deal, but you can see how on both sides there's this angling for particular benefits rather than a general principle. Whatever you think of tariffs as a general policy, we talked about that some weeks ago. But setting that aside, is it a good idea to have a tariff be 15% unless what? Well, unless it's a matter of national security, okay, plausible. But unless you happen to be a good friend of the Trump family, unless you happen to have high connections with the EU, unless you happen to be an old name with lots of Washington inside experience, not so good. Right? That's the kind of factious stuff we're talking about. And these kind of trade deals, because it's all about the details and all we read is sort of the top line number, these are rife with opportunity for factious action.
Yeah, and I think that's the age that we live in as well. You're talking big money here. You're talking an American federal government, right, that has a budget of X each year, that is what, maybe 100, 200 times what it was 200 years ago. So because there's that bigger pie to be divided by these special interests, these factions, it makes it that much more of a problem to try to overcome. But then I think you add in other elements to this as well. I mean, think, for example, Matt, on the federal deficit right now and entitlements that are present. I mean, you're talking about making policy today in the year 2025 is going to have a dramatic impact on the American way of life in 2050 or 2075. So you can vote into place policies in 2025 that hurt your children and grandchildren and just not even care about it, not even think about it, because what are you? You're kind of drawn to the immediate benefit of how the policy works for you in this place and time.
So, yeah, I mean, there was an interesting article that was looking back 20 years and asking the question, what if President Bush's Social Security proposal to privatize part of that had gone through 20 years ago? How would that have changed where we are? And there's a lot of speculation, obviously, but you can replay this pretty well by thinking about the parameters of the bill at the time and looking at how the stock markets performed and making various assumptions. And it would have been much, much better, especially for people that are middle class and below. And all the more so because it would have lowered the long-term liability of Social Security and made it possible to imagine, depending upon how other scenarios, and maybe there's a tax increase that goes along with this to placate Democrats at the time, you could actually put Social Security on a glide path toward a reasonable trajectory so that it never runs out of money. It's self-sustaining indefinitely. But that didn't happen. The issue was demagogued in 2005, and everyone learned their lesson. Don't do that again. Don't bring that up. Don't even hint at that, because you're going to be accused of wanting to kill grandparents and destroy all that's right and good. And so where are we? Well, we're 20 years later. There is no private solution because diverting money from the federal system now would just massively explode the deficit. There's no surplus anymore. The surplus is gone. And the quote unquote trust fund, which was just IOUs that are being spent even as we speak and will themselves expire another 10 years, all that's going to be gone too. And then what? Right? But because of the demagoguery, the factious demagoguery of 20 years ago, you're at a point where your options are much less attractive than they were then. And the ways forward are going to require real sacrifice on the part of future generations, right? I mean, the present generation, in a sense, is a massive faction when it comes to Social Security. Present voters, everybody alive who's currently voting is a faction against the future. And not much you can do about that except to have some honesty and to recognize you have a responsibility to your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren to do right by them. And that's a difficult message to sell and to receive in our day and age.
Difficult, but I don't think impossible. And I think it just brings us to kind of the conclusion of this. Okay, well, how could we get back, I don't know, I'm going to phrase this correctly, to practicing the habits of justice? What would it mean to practice the habits of justice? And certainly, okay, under my plan, we'll all do X, okay, and the president will act this way, et cetera. And those are unrealistic. But I do think in our everyday lives, we can begin to practice the habits of justice and to teach those to those around us. That's what we're doing as parents. So as a parent, it's important to instill in your child a sense of another person's human dignity.
Yeah.
And you do that, when they come home from school and say X, Y, and Z, and you're like, well, hold on a second, that's a human being that you're dealing with. And over and over again with your child, bringing to the fore the dignity of the other human being. Secondly, teaching your child responsibility, that you are a moral agent, right? You can't blame others for everything that happens to you. And you have to take on your shoulders the choices that you make. There have to be consequences for the choices that you make. And I think, thirdly, teaching your child to be honorable. What's it mean to be honorable? Right, to have a high honor that leads your path in life. So I think it can be done, Matt. I think it can be done within a more proximate sphere to us as individuals. And some of us have the ability to extend that sphere. Some of us have been given positions where we're influencing larger groups of people. That could be 100 or 200 or 500 people. And we're once again trying to instill these habits of justice within whatever periphery that we have some connection with. And I think that's important for anyone listening to this. We get back to that starting with the faction that's sown into my own person and the remedy that's present moving forward in my own life.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think starting with your family circle and then going out from there, again, depending upon the range of your influence, but to use that to teach and to be an example of justice, right? To talk through why you wouldn't support something that would otherwise be in favor of your interests because you see it as wrong. And those are real moments for people to, kind of head scratchers when you're opposed to something that materially would be beneficial to you because you think it's wrong. And that's the kind of moment where others can maybe just take a step back and say, maybe I've got to do the same thing. Maybe I've got to really think through places where I'm just reflexively accepting benefits that I haven't really earned, or wanting to decouple effort and reward and earn my living or some benefit off the back of somebody else's labor.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and it almost goes without saying, but it's bringing back the language of equality and responsibility and honor and justice, calling behavior factious, and using the word that is applicable to the act, the genuine intellectual honesty about how we're operating and why we're operating that way. And there's nothing preventing that language from being used again now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've seen the impact that using this language has upon a classroom. It doesn't mean that you wipe the slate clean and everyone kind of leaves your class angelic, but there's a recognition there by the 18 to 22-year-old that there's something different. There's a well that I can draw upon in my life. I may forget about it at points, but I can draw upon as I go through life, and I try to live a just existence for myself, my family, and the greater community around me.
That's a great place to leave it, I think, Dave, for this week. Of course, we'll pick up next time with our fifth principle, but we also have the Tocqueville's crystal ball before we wrap things up. And this is a kind of victory lap for you, I think, Dave. I mean, we picked the British Open last time around, or the Open Championship, and wow, you nailed it.
Yeah, I have to. I mean, I hope that this streak that I'm on continues through this weekend, as you'll see, and where we're going. But yes, I mean, I pick Scotty Scheffler. That's like picking Babe Ruth to hit a home run, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
That's the hardest call, right?
the Wyndham Clark though, based upon his, that was pretty impressive. I have to,
That
I
was
have to
really
pat myself on my
impressive.
back. Yes.
Yeah, because after day one, he shot 76 day one. He was 128th. I mean, he was going to have to work hard to make the cut. And he finishes in a tie for fourth. Those last 3 rounds, he shot as low as Scheffler. I mean, it was a really incredible performance. So, yeah, I mean, kudos to you and to him. He didn't destroy the locker room, which is a good thing. So I think he'll be welcome back next time around. So,
Good.
yeah, my picks were okay, I would say. Tommy Fleetwood finished tied for 16. Not horrible. That was my winner, though. Keegan Bradley finished tied for 30. He was doing better after a couple of rounds. I think it was the last round he didn't play as well and slipped a few places. So, I wouldn't give that terrible marks, but it wasn't great.
I would give you terrible marks. 16th and 30. I mean, that's what the great inflation you're giving yourself.
All right. Fair enough. But now we come to Spieth. And unfortunately, our friend Jordan Spieth did not have a particularly good tournament. I mean, he made the cut, so I guess that's made some money, but finished tied for 40th. You had him 8th, I had him 14th, so we were both a bit optimistic there. But
another rough year. Yeah, it's I mean, I hope he figures it out. That'd be a great story, but it's just
yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever magic he had at 21, 22, 23, it's just not there. The consistency that he used to have. So speaking of young hotshots, this time we're going to talk about the new Red Sox budding superstar, Roman Anthony. So he came up about 40 games ago and, one of the big 3 prospects they were talking about in spring training. And, he's done very, very well. Already got some buzz. Not going to win the Rookie of the Year award because others have had been up for the whole season and done better, but done very well. And so we're going to try to predict our final numbers for Roman Anthony. Now, at the moment, the Red Sox leadoff hitter, which would have some bearing on all this. But tell me, Dave, runs, home runs, RBIs, and then give us his slash line, batting average, on base, and slugging.
So I know I'm getting old because I subscribe to Major League Baseball radio, and I listen to a lot of the Red Sox games. And I know you've done that for a long time, and it's great. But I tell you, there's something to listening to a game in which you get to kind of understand the character of a player. And what makes Anthony special are the pitches that he takes, right? The habits he has, the understanding of the strike zone that may not find its way to a stat sheet, but at the end of the day, it leads to winning.
Yeah.
And so we're going to go through his stats and our predictions. But I mean, right now, he's played 40 games. There are about 50 games left in the season. So about a third of the season left to be played. And he gets on base. Like I think his on base percentage is maybe in the top 5 in the league over the last 2 months. Yeah. So I think he's going to continue that. I think he's going to just get better and better. I mean, if you know the strike zone, this is kind of Ted Williams' art of hitting. If you know the strike zone, you play baseball. You're a hitter. So I think right now he's scoring runs because you get on base, you'll score runs. I think he continues to do that at a clip of, I'll give him another 35 runs scored for the rest of the year, especially if he's playing leadoff. Power is not there just yet, but I don't think he's really trying to hit it out of the park every plate at bat. So I'll give him 5 home runs at the end of the year, 40 RBIs. He'll get some chances to knock people in. It's a pretty deep Red Sox lineup, but he just stays the course and he just continues to get better. And I'm really excited, Matt. At the end of the day, this guy is a guy that he's 21 now.
Yeah.
You get stronger as you get older. You kind of hit your prime. 25, 26, 27. I think you've got a really, really special player there. So it won't be stats that blow you away, but I think definitely more good to come from Roman Anthony, and then hopefully more good to come for the Red Sox this year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we put comparative stat lines. Most numbers I'm a little bit lower than yours. I think I've got him with a few more home runs, so we'll see how it all shakes out. A little higher slugging average as a result, but yeah, it's great. I mean, these days you just don't see guys getting on base. I mean, so many batters batting 240. With a 320 on base average. And that would have gotten you run out of the league 20 years ago. And Anthony's up there. He's hitting 275, maybe 280, but he's getting the walks. He gets some hit by pitch. He's got an on base average of 400. I mean, that's just You just don't find that. Outside of your Aaron Judge, the guy's getting walked all the time because everyone's so afraid to pitch to him. This is a different model, right? Like you're saying, this is real strike zone judgment, and you will succeed if you don't swing at pitches outside the strike zone. Right? If you know the strike zone, you swing at strikes, you will succeed. And there's no reason to think he's not going to continue to get better. So I'm very excited.
Fitting that we're discussing him when we're discussing the principle of justice, because I think he takes a just approach to the game.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
Is not the way a lot of players play these days.
All right, so big question with this being Wednesday. Normally we tape on Thursday, but Wednesday, we got about a day and a little bit before the trade deadline. Are the Red Sox going to make a big deal, Dave? What do you think?
Well, you kind of know if you listen to the show, I go big or go home. So
Yeah.
I'm saying yes. I'm the optimist. I think they go all in. I think that. I mean, the guy that's on everyone's radar, but everyone says is too hard to get is the pitcher from the Twins, Joe Ryan.
Yeah.
If you follow the Sox, they need a second starter, right? Crochet is amazing. You get that second starter, given the way the playoffs are. You have two great pitchers, two great aces or almost aces, and you can go a long way in the playoffs. So I think they realize this, and they try to kind of put into place this pathway to kind of excellence for 3 to 5 years. So that's my hope. How about you, Matt? Big trade at the deadline or not?
That is my hope. That is not my expectation. I think they're gonna maybe try to get a reliever on an expiring contract, that kind of thing, just to sort of say they did something. But this front office does not seem like they want to go all in just yet. And maybe that's smart, but I think we'd all love a decent playoff run. It's been several years since they even made the playoffs. So I think the fan base definitely wants to see some action, but my guess is that they keep their powder dry and maybe in the off season we get another big Crochet type deal, but I'm not expecting it the next day.
That's boring.
Yeah.
I hope you're wrong.
Me too.
Well, we have another second bonus on the Tocqueville's crystal ball. I mentioned we're going to Saratoga, and I'm a very disciplined gambler, Matt. So I allot a certain amount of money for the races. It's about $100 a day that I give myself. So here's the crystal ball here. How much money will I win or lose this weekend at Saratoga?
All right, so your net on that $200.
So my net.
Your net.
Okay, so I think I walk in with family. Like I said, it's a great event. Got my $200 to spend those 2 days. I think I walk out of there with $80. So 60% loss. I lose $120. It's 12 hours of good fun.
Yeah.
$10 an hour. There's no good movies anymore. So I'm happy. I leave $80 in hand to buy 2 cappuccinos and an omelet on Sunday and be done with it. So
there you
go. Matt, what do you have for me?
For a guy who's always optimistic, I think that's a pretty maybe realistic take on things, maybe born of experience. But I'd like to know a little more about your technique here. I mean, are we just kind of going for the names that we like? We like long shots, or are we doing any looking at the speed in the quarter mile, what the speed indexes and those kinds of things?
Good question. Okay. So here's my technique. Use it if you ever go up there. I learned it you can learn so much from these older guys that are there that you kind of just, if you standing in the right place and they sound wise enough and you're like, I'm going to try that. So one thing I've learned to do is you always bet on a horse that you think has the best chance to win, but you pair that horse with a longer shot that may be the 4th or 5th most liked horse for that race. With the idea that, okay, this horse could finish 1-2 with the person that everyone thinks is going to win. So I pair horses that way, and you bet an exact box for these 2 horses, and it's worked out more often than not. Albeit at the end of the day, when you've kind of won a little bit, you tend to get a little more fancy or put more money down.
Right.
And if you just stick with like $1, $2 bets, that's the way to go. You have fun, and sometimes it works out. So that's my method, Matt.
Okay. All right.
So
we got 2 days, right? Okay. I'm saying after day one, you got $100 day one. I'm going to say you're up. You're like at 140.
Okay.
After $100, you turn 100 into 140 on day one.
Okay.
Day two, your blood gets hot, and you start reaching a little bit. and you walk out of there. I'm going to say 91. I'll give you a little more credit than you are, but I say day two, it doesn't
It's a
quite
rough
go
day.
as well, and you still have a good time, and you didn't lose your shirt, didn't embarrass yourself, but
Okay. All right. I've got $11 more in your
$11 more, right? You can buy
Okay.
a second
Second
coffee there for
cappuccino.
second.
Okay. Good.
All right.
Good stuff. All right. Well, next time we're on, I'll have the results for you, and hopefully we'll have Joe Ryan.
Yep.
And Roman Anthony will continue to be Roman Anthony. All good.
Sounds great. All right. Well, good as always to be able to talk through these things with you, Dave. And if you want to connect with us further, you can reach out through democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. We'll look forward to talking to you again real soon.
2020 vision.